Ordinary dreams. These are basically your default sleep settings. Your brain mashes together different fragments from thoughts, memories, and everyday life, creating strange events, usually in social scenes, which tend to be overly emotional. They can take any form, from a realistic movie to a bizarre sandbox, but they all have something in common. Based on tens of thousands of dream reports, ordinary dreams mostly feature familiar people and places, altered pieces of waking life, and tend to focus more on negative emotions. In specific, a feeling of anxiety or dread that something bad might happen. This is commonly believed to be a reflection of waking concerns. Because why should you get a break when you could spend the entire night stressing as well? That doesn't mean every dream has a hidden message though. A dream about losing your pants at school may reflect an innate fear of embarrassment, but it might also just be a random construction drawn from both fresh and older memories. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain that controls decision making and emotion regulation, is less active during dreaming, which means the brain doesn't question strange details. A house can also be your school, or a friend can somehow be a stranger, and you automatically go along with it. Everyone has ordinary dreams, including those who claim they don't. They simply don't remember. Healthy adults have roughly 3 to 6 dream episodes per night, most concentrated in REM periods. It stands for rapid eye movement and is a unique phase of the sleep cycle where your eyes go crazy and your body enters a temporary paralysis. These periods are also closely linked to a different type of dream, vivid dreams, also called the ordinary dream's weird uncle by me. Any dream type on this list can be vivid, as it describes intensity rather than content. These are the dreams that linger after waking, sometimes affecting you throughout the day. That's due to them being exceptionally clear, intense, and producing strong lifelike images in your mind. So basically an ordinary dream, but turned up by 150%. But how do they work? And what causes a normal dream to turn vivid? Once again, part of the answer lies within the REM phase. Anything that increases REM pressure, REM duration, or arousals out of REM makes dreams more vivid and more remembered. The best documented triggers include REM rebound, the body's natural compensatory mechanism where your brain enters REM sleep faster and spends a longer time there. It typically happens to recover from lost REM sleep, often caused by sleep deprivation, alcohol/drug use, or stress. But the main and most deciding factor is undoubtedly your emotional processing load. People suffering from stress, anxiety, or trauma are more likely to experience frequent vivid dreams. So just as an ordinary dream, it is affected by your mental state, meaning heightened emotional load intensifies dream content. Vivid dreams work as a parent category to a bunch of smaller dream types, including fever dreams, a recognized phenomenon you've probably experienced. When you're sick, higher body temperatures disrupt REM sleep, resulting in emotionally intense and often bizarre nightmares. Another subtype is pandemic dreams, a term that resurfaced during the COVID-19 pandemic, where a Harvard study documented a global surge in vivid anxious dreams, driven by stress plus changes to sleep schedules allowed for longer morning REM. And lastly, my personal favorite, the first night dreams. These occur when sleeping in an unfamiliar environment, where your brain remains hypervigilant, causing lighter sleep and frequent nighttime awakenings. Because you wake up more often, you are much more likely to remember the intense dreams that occur during REM. Everyone has occasional vivid dreams, some more than others, due to lifestyle choices, medication, or people going through hormonal changes. Adolescents and young adults naturally have more of them, as REM proportion and dream intensity decline gradually with age. Now on to a type science has a harder time explaining: recurring dreams. At some point in your life, you'll most likely experience it, reliving a dream completely identical or with a similar plot as past dreams. They aren't exactly uncommon. As I explained before, dreams tend to draw experience from everyday life, meaning someone with an identical routine will experience dreams that often overlap. However, where things get really interesting is when the plot, themes, or exact dream becomes universal across cultures. The most common plots involve being chased, falling, or anything to do with being embarrassed or late for something, which of course isn't anything supernatural and merely a reflection of human emotions. Almost everyone feels stressed, and as mentioned earlier, stress is easily adapted into any type of dream. Furthermore, the feeling of being chased or falling is closely tied with innate ancestral dangers, something that creates a direct link between every human on Earth. But what if two people with no relation and nothing in common dream the exact same dream? In Gene Campbell's Dreams to the 10th Power group dreaming experiments, two participants, John and Sharon, reportedly experienced a completely identical dream despite having never met in person. And to make it even stranger, the two recognized each other from the dream. Now, before getting too excited, these results were ultimately unproven, and the experiment itself specifically encouraged them to meet other participants in dreams, creating expectation and possible priming. So although this isn't exactly proof, if you combine it with the countless other reports and claims, a pattern emerges. That at least proves one thing: there is still so much we've yet to learn about the dream world. But in most cases, a recurring dream is usually seen as a signal flag. Something unresolved keeps affecting your mental state, causing you to experience the same theme when sleeping. About 60 to 75% of adults report having had at least one recurring dream, and they're more frequent during times of stress, sadness, or any other change in mental welfare. That's also why if your frequent recurring dreams suddenly stop, it's usually a sign of mental improvement. Now, speaking of having much to learn still, about the true power of dreams, I believe it's time to cover a type of dream that defies all logical explanations: prophetic dreams. In 1865, the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, reportedly told his inner circle about a nightmare. In that dream, Lincoln described wandering the White House and hearing the quiet sobs of mourners, before eventually entering the East Room, where he found a covered corpse surrounded by soldiers and a weeping crowd. When he asked a soldier who had died, the guard replied, it was the president who'd been killed by an assassin. And a few days later, on April 15th, Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed by an assassin. Science has tried to explain this by referring to the law of large numbers, which states a person has over 100,000 dreams in a lifetime, so by chance alone, some will resemble later events. Furthermore, our brain is a master at pattern recognition, as well as selective recall, meaning we forget the thousands of non-matching dreams and remember the one actual hit. But that barely scratches the surface. Given the fascination surrounding the subject, there are literally thousands of unproven theories, some more credible than others. To save time, I'll focus on one explanation that appears repeatedly across the available material. The most likely explanation is fear. As with any other type of dream, the thoughts that occupy our minds are more likely to shape what we dream about. Abraham Lincoln had every reason to fear for his life, reportedly receiving thousands of death threats during his presidency. It is therefore entirely possible that this anxiety was the main influence behind his so-called prophetic dream. But who has them, and how often? According to surveys, roughly a third to a half of people believe they have had at least one precognitive dream, and belief in dream precognition remains high across cultures. Reports tend to spike around major public tragedies, especially after events like the Aberfan disaster in 1966, which led to an actual scientific investigation in Britain, but none of its collected predictions proved usable, primarily because most accounts relied on paranormal beliefs, which are generally considered the least credible. In conclusion, prophetic dreams that supposedly predict future events remain unproven as a supernatural phenomenon. With that in mind, it seems only fitting that the next type of dream involves a supernatural experience that has actually been documented: lucid dreams. If you haven't been living under a rock, you've probably heard of it. The ability to regain consciousness inside a dream, which allows you to control dream events, characters, the environment, or literally anything else you want. If done correctly, a lucid dream can be one of the greatest feelings you can experience. And the best part, it's not only secluded monks who can do it, anyone with the patience to learn will inevitably experience one if wanted. Lucid dreams were long dismissed as impossible until a Stanford experiment proved it in the late 1970s to 80s. It was done using an elegant experiment. Since the eyes aren't paralyzed during REM, trained lucid dreamers signaled from within a dream using pre-agreed eye movement patterns. And in the years after, we've also learned that the prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain I mentioned earlier, is active during REM, which allows for self-reflection inside the dream. There's multiple different techniques for lucid dreaming, such as mild, wild, dilled, or simple reality checks. So if you're looking to try yourself, I've already got a few simple guides, and I'm planning many more, so make sure to subscribe. The possibilities of lucid dreams are endless. They can be used for fun, or they can be used to further your understanding of yourself. They allow you to visit past memories, even if you barely remember them, speak to past loved ones to help if you're suffering from trauma, or you can practice any type of skill, as practicing movements in lucid dreams is proven to measurably improve waking performance. As far as I'm aware, there are no significant drawbacks aside from the possibility of reduced sleep quality. So for anyone who's still uncertain, I would strongly recommend giving it a try. Meta-analytic surveys found that about 55% of people have experienced at least one lucid dream. That said, it's worth noting that even a brief moment of awareness still qualifies as a lucid dream. Achieving complete control without prior training is extremely rare. Naturally occurring lucid dreams also appear to be more common among people who regularly play video games or practice meditation. However, after discussing lucid dreams, one question inevitably comes up: can you become trapped inside a dream? To explore the answer, it's time to turn our attention to an entirely different type of dream: false awakening dreams. As the name implies, a false awakening occurs when someone believes they've woken up. You get out of bed, shower, dress, head to work, and then either actually wake up, sometimes into another false awakening, or notice something impossible and realize you're still asleep. The dreamed bedroom is usually a convincing replica of your real one, which is what makes the illusion so seamless. In 1968, false awakenings were divided into two categories. Type 1 refers to ordinary, realistic experiences in which a person appears to wake up and follow their usual routine. Type 2 is more unsettling, often creating a strong sense that something is wrong. It may also involve the feeling of another presence nearby and an intensified emotional response similar to that experienced during sleep paralysis. False awakenings usually happen during REM sleep, when the brain is awake enough to imagine waking up but not alert enough to question whether it's real. They are more common during stress, irregular schedules, and lucid dream practice, but they don't usually mean anything pathological. Recurrent, distressing false awakenings, especially with type 2, are usually a signal of stress rather than deep symbolism, which is also why they're very common as an occasional experience. About 70 to 80% have experienced at least one false awakening, with lucid dreamers, insomniacs, and people with narcolepsy experiencing them the most, who reportedly consider them a separate type of dream, particularly basically type 2 false awakenings. Nightmares. Vivid, disturbing dreams, which most often involve threats to survival, safety, or self-esteem that awaken the sleeper, who then remembers the dream clearly and is immediately alert and oriented. The awakening is what distinguishes them from ordinary bad dreams, which also means it's the same negative themes but doubled in emotional distress. Further common themes include death, conflict, or the feeling of helplessness. Fear isn't actually universal, as many nightmares center on sadness, confusion, or guilt instead. Just like ordinary bad dreams, nightmares occur due to a failure of the emotional regulation function of REM sleep, but because of the heightened response, the dream amplifies it past the threshold that triggers awakening. Outside of trauma replay, nightmares generally track the dreamer's dominant fears. They're your internal system running worst-case simulations. That's why occasional nightmares are considered normal and ultimately inevitable. On the other hand, only about 2 to 8% experience nightmares weekly, with roughly 4 to 5% being the criteria for a nightmare disorder. Which brings us to the next category, an outlier on this list since it is not technically a dream at all. Night terrors, also called sleep terrors, are episodes of intense fear, screaming and thrashing with a racing pulse, dilated pupils, and rapid breathing that erupts out of the deepest stage of non-REM sleep. The person may sit upright, scream, or appear terrified with eyes fully open, all while they aren't truly awake and usually can't be comforted. Once finally awoken, they rarely have any memory of the episode in the morning. This amnesia, plus the timing, is what cleanly separates night terrors from nightmares. Night terrors frequently co-occur with sleepwalking, which shares the same mechanism, and are best understood as a disorder of arousal. The brain becomes caught between deep sleep and wakefulness, activating basic fear and movement responses while the conscious mind remains asleep. Since deep sleep is most common early in the night, sleep terrors usually occur within 1 to 3 hours of falling asleep. Episodes typically last from about 30 seconds to a few minutes, with the main trigger being sleep deprivation. With that said, they're believed to be rare in adults, with only about 1 to 2% having experienced one at some point. But due to the amnesia, that number could be significantly higher. And don't even get me started on babies, who pretty much live through all dream types on a weekly basis. Maybe with the sole exception of the only dream on this list, that happens when a person is fully awake. Daydreams. Everyone has them, sometimes even 100 times a day. They're self-generated thoughts and images that guide your attention away from the present moment by replaying conversations, imagining the future, or getting lost in fantasies. Daydreaming happens when the brain shifts its attention inward. This is linked to the default mode network, a group of brain regions that becomes more active when we aren't focused on the outside world. Interestingly, the same network is also active during dreams, which is why some researchers believe daydreaming and dreaming may exist on the same spectrum. Not all daydreaming is the same though. Some daydreams are creative and useful, helping us plan, solve problems, imagine the future, and understand other people. Others can become repetitive, distracting, or negative. So while daydreaming can hurt concentration and performance, it can also play an important role in creativity, planning, and self-reflection. With that said, it's now time for the last dream type, arguably the most impactful and thought-provoking on the entire list. Epic dreams, sometimes also called great dreams, are unusually long, vivid, and detailed dreams that can feel like entire movies, or in some cases entire lifetimes. People may dream of traveling through huge landscapes, living alternate lives, or going through a dramatic journey resulting in meaningful transformation. What makes them stand out is their complexity and the lasting impression they leave after waking. Official research is still limited, as science doesn't recognize epic dreams as a formal sleep disorder. However, even when a dream seems to last for years, the actual dream likely lasts only minutes. That's because the brain's logic center slows down, and the mind edits out boring parts. But even though the story wasn't real, the impact it leaves behind is. In 2012, a man reportedly lived inside a dream for what felt like 10 years after being knocked unconscious. In that dream, he met a woman, married her, started a family, and built a career, until suddenly noticing a lamp in his living room, which began to look geometrically wrong. That's when he woke up on the sidewalk, shortly after the original injury. As you can probably imagine, this left him feeling empty, and he went through about 3 years of horrid depression, frequently missing his family, although they never existed. Some psychological traditions interpret these dreams as meaningful reflections of identity, change, or mortality. A more scientific explanation is simply that they are unusually vivid and emotionally powerful dreams. Either way, their impact can be real, sometimes influencing a person's mood, thoughts, decisions, or beliefs long after waking. And with that, we've reached the end, but I'm curious, how many of the different dream types have you experienced? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to learn more about dreams, lucid dreaming, and what your brain gets up to while you sleep, subscribe. There's a lot more astral equations to explore.